Hello everyone, this is Fieldmaster Victor Neustroyev. Thank you for coming to my webinar. We are going to talk about strategic planning in the endgame. However, before we start with our main topic, we will work on the homework from the previous webinar. By the way, can you please let me know whether the sound and video quality is good? This time, I'm also streaming it on YouTube, so everything works. I was able to prolong my previous Zoom account, so we can do classes using this permanent link. So it's not an issue anymore, and through this Zoom account, I can stream on YouTube. Fine. So people are still joining. So guys, I will mute yourself, but once you want to say something, you can unmute and mm, definitely suggest something. Okay. So what we were talking at our previous webinar. At our previous webinar, we were doing. Let me find it. Yeah, thanks. So everything works. Yeah, we were talking about tactics and strategy. That was your homework. I'm sure you can see it on your screen. So there were two questions: how to deal with this black attack on the first position, and how to react on e5 move in the second position. So let's discuss. Let me illustrate it. For example, I'm sure you see the screen. So this happened in the game. And here white reacted with bishop b6, which was a mistake. So bishop b6 allows them to capture on h2, king goes there, and then a takes b6. And the black pieces are so active that white cannot avoid a perpetual check in this position. Well, I actually think that it was possible to play not this, but rook h1, king f2, queen h4, like that. Queen h4, then the king goes there, queen g5, f4, queen g3, so the king is in trouble. There is no way to block, the king has to escape, but it still looks like a serious problem. Actually, bishop d3 looks, everything is fine. However, rook takes e1. Well, no, this is where white is fine. Okay, this is where white is fine. So a takes b6, and then without this bishop, they cannot avoid checks on the dark squares. So here in the game, they continued with bishop e6. Why bishop e6? Why not something else? For example, why not to capture with a pawn? Well, I think it doesn't matter. It's still a perpetual check. King f2, queen h4, king e3, and rook d8 to stop it. The same thing happened in the game, but they took with a bishop. Bishop takes, rook h1, king f2, queen h4, king goes there, and the key move in this position is rook d8. So even if, if this rook takes on h1, it's a checkmate with queen d4, obviously. But if, let's say, rook cd1, then it's queen g5, queen h4 repetition, because the king cannot move further. Once they try f4, queen g3 is a big problem, and they have to sacrifice the queen. So the game ended in a draw. But instead of doing bishop b6, this mistake, there was a better way that could allow white to still play for a win. Who knows? Who knows? How should we play in this position? Maybe you can find how white should play in order to save their position. Maybe bishop f4 defending. Okay, good point. Bishop f4, but bishop f4 means rook f4 actually. And black restores material balance. Maybe bishop g1 doesn't work. If, let's say, bishop g1 is played in this position, then just bishop takes g1. And then still there is a problem with h2. So it's similar with the exchange that happened on b6 in the game. Instead, it's f4. Well, f4. No, f4, then you lose there, then you lose on g2. There is a chance to lose the game quickly. So it's g4. Well, you may ask me, how does g4 works? There is a pin, so isn't it just a pawn blunder? Yes, there is a pawn sacrifice, not a blunder. Well, if of course you then continue with knight d2, defending on f3, then
Countdown to Kenny G taking us on a velvety, smooth journey through a winter wonderland.
okay, so if bishop e3, then queen takes e3 and queen f5. This is where black has the attack. But look at this tactical idea. So we can play bishop d5 and liquidate the pin. So Herman, I will mute yourself because there is a background noise. Okay. So bishop d5. This is how it works, and it makes the queen hanging. What's that? Well, this is definitely a blunder. This leads to a checkmate. E takes d5. Well, yes, but then the queen is lost. d4 can be played, of course. Just liquidate this bishop and everything else is fine. So we can continue even with bishop d4, because if they take our bishop, we checkmate with queen e8. Queen f5? Well, queen f5 is playable, but this time we exchange this dangerous bishop and our position is well defended. Both targets are defended. So for example, rook takes c6, rook takes c6, b takes c6, and just knight d2, extra piece, and there is no compensation. So g4 was one of the ways to solve strategic issues by tactical means. Okay, and the second game that we were not discussing last time, I think it was this. So bishop b6, maybe not the best move, too early to play this. First, some prophylaxis was required. Maybe bishop h2, creating a discovered attack with this rook. Anyway, it was bishop b6 played, knight takes b6, rook takes, and rook d7. And then e5 was played. So what's the purpose of e5? To force the knight to move to a very unpleasant position. Well, is the pawn hanging? Well, probably, but you have to calculate rook takes b7. And in that game, Gennady Kuzmin calculated it properly well. So e5 was played, and he decided to sacrifice a piece. He captured on e5, sacrificing on b7. And for that piece, he got a very strong initiative that he could later take advantage of. So rook d2, this is hanging. If this moves, it's queen e1. Queen b3, because, well, defending the knight helps to cover the e1 square. How to continue after that? All the pieces are stuck on that side, and the rook isn't active, so there is no possibility to exchange the rooks. The best thing that this rook can do is probably to take on a6, which is not required because it's still too slow. What do you think? How black should continue their attack? Rook f2 is a good move, I agree, but then you have to decide where to move the rook again. So, well, if you try to do something like that, I think they can just exchange the queens with queen b6. Okay, so the link is not changing every week. We did use a different link last weekend because I experienced problems with my ordinary Zoom account. So now I was able to prolong it. So I have to prolong the license, and this link will stay for a while, for maybe a few months. Why so? Well, sometimes it does make sense to change the link because some people may show some inappropriate behavior. Like once it happened in the webinar, and I had to delete the recording, unfortunately, because of that. So Queen C5, no, Queen C5, Rook C5. Well, Rook C5, I think Rook B8 is a problem. Queen C5, Queen B6 is a problem. Not like that. Yeah. So Queen C5, Queen B6. Ah, actually, it's fine. Yeah, you can take on C2. Okay, then instead of that, I'll keep defending this knight, but play knight A4 to threaten the queen. Yeah, so if the queen moves, it's king F2. If rook F1, then it's just exchange sacrifice. No, rook F2 doesn't look good. So H5, just a very slow move, and White just has no resources. Maybe they'd better play this, maybe something else, but they decided to simplify the position by exchanging the knights. And that was another mistake, after which black is completely winning. So the black plan here is this, which threatens this and makes the H2 more vulnerable. And it's really hard to withstand such a plan. So maybe H3 would make sense, but then you can even continue with H4 or G5, G4, and open the position, because these pieces are unable to help the king to defend the position. So knight e4, knight e4, f takes e4. So here you can take, but then it's knight e3. Instead, it does make sense to play this move first, because if your opponent plays knight e3, which by the first glance cements the position, what do you think you can continue here? Again, rook f2. Okay, rook f2, it's still king g1. H4 makes sense, I agree. But actually, yeah, H4 does make sense. I think it's a good move. But instead of doing H4, there is a better move. You just bring the rook. And if so, you're now threatening with this. How does it work? If king g1 this time, rook d1 works. Wait, does it work? Well, let's say I play a random move. Rook f2, king g1. And well, rook d1 probably is too risky. Let's do rook dd2. We are threatening to take there, play queen f2, and then capture on g2. And I don't think there is a defense. Maybe queen b6, but for queen b6 we have a better suggestion. We can play this move, and they cannot take with the queen because the queen has gone, and once they take with a knight, it's game over. So because of enemy pieces being stuck on the queen side, the black's attack, even without a piece, becomes dangerous. So okay, this exchange happened. Knight e3, rook cd8, queen c3, and queen f2. Rook f2 was actually maybe a better move, but queen f2 works well too. So rook d1 is a threat now. h3, well, it's still possible to play rook d1. I think that was actually the best move, because we are going to exchange the rook for two minor pieces and then continue the attack. So if this, then take there and try to take there, and queen g1, lure the king away and try to attack it with h4, queen f4, and so on. So h3, black played h4. Not the best move, but still a move that restricts the king and provides black with good chances to succeed. So king h2, check, king g1. And the final move, who will find it? Thanks for Borsio and John. Yes, it's a rook from d8 to d3. How does it work? Well, it's a fork. Well, if they take with a bishop, then it's queen e3, and I think it's a checkmate, right? So the king f1 is a blunder, king h1 is a loses two. So this checkmate. What else they can do? This is where they actually resigned. But if they sacrifice the queen, which in my opinion is the best move, you can take there. Bishop takes queen e3, and you win this bishop. So of course, with queen versus rook, white has no chances. So what does it tell us? That e5 was an interesting idea, but white underestimated the activity of the black pieces. And they didn't realize that because the white pieces are on the other side of the board, even without material, this attack becomes strong. Fine. So today we are going to talk about strategic planning in the end game, and this is the first position to discuss. Before we start, let me tell you something. So how to play the end games? Well, there are a lot of things to do, and if you don't know what you typically should do in the end game, let me help you. So, what we do? Well, the main goal of the end game play is to create a passed pawn and either to promote this passed pawn or tie enemy pieces down to that passed pawn and maybe create the second passed pawn. The first thing that you should start doing is attacking enemy pawn weaknesses or just occupying weak squares with your pieces in order to improve them. If you don't see that you can attack something or you think it's not promising, the second priority is to bring the king to the center. As well, if you play on both sides of the board. So if there are pawns on both sides of the board, bring the king to the center. If there are no pawns on the queen side, then just bring the king closer to the center of the board, but on the king side. So for example, f6 or g6 or something like that. But here, definitely bringing the king to the center is a must, but not immediately. First of all, black should improve the position of their rook by doing tempo gaining moves. So, why is it called strategic thinking, strategic planning? Because we are able to visualize the moves which should be played, and once these moves are made, either our position becomes better or the enemy position becomes bad. So the key idea is to visualize this scheme, the series of moves which makes your position better. So who can Yes, Bartholomew, thank you. Yeah, exactly. Well, this is what I said. No, the first is to attack weak pawns, and the final goal is to promote a pass pawn. In some cases, head directly toward the weaknesses that can defend it. Yes, yes, exactly. So you can capture enemy pawns if they cannot be defended. The king pieces. Well, we will see this in the game. So rook a8 to a4 is the move that suggested by Dan. Okay, it does make sense. So it's definitely better than rook b3. By the way, I see that there are some new members at our webinar today. Um, you guys, can you please share what your ELO is? It can be even chess.com ELO or Lichess, or if you have official international rating like FIDE or USCF, please share. By the way, Alex, uh, how old are you? And what's your rating? 7. Okay, perfect. So probably just come. Well, okay. Probably Alex is the youngest participant of our webinars. Perfect. the youngest student I ever worked was, well, it was actually my daughter. I started to work with her at the age of 4 and several months. And I also have a student from Mexico. We started working when he was around 4, but we were work online. Okay, so perfect. Uh, some strong players here even. Fine. So rook b3 doesn't make sense. Why? Because rook b3 forces rook a2. And then you have to defend your position against this plan. So that's why, well, usually we prefer to locate the rooks behind. And if the king was on g1, then doing such a check, forcing the king to move further, but occupying the a file and attack the pawn through behind would work perfectly well. But this time, once we do this, it's too late. Rook a2 happens. And now they started their plan advancing the pass pawn. That's why rook a8. We not only attack the pawn, but we blockade it with the rook on a4. So in case if this move is played, we can play rook a4, attack d4. And actually we do win a pawn because after d5, simply our king comes and either the d5 pawn is lost or the pawn on a3. That's why they defended with this move. Rook a4. Rook d3. So first of all, we did this strategic maneuver, which improved our rook a little. It made it active because our rook is doing two tasks. It attacks d4, it attacks a3 simultaneously, and the enemy rook becomes passive. The only thing it does, the defense of the pawn. And once the rook moves anywhere, one of these two pawns is lost. Oh, okay. So very looks like Alex is a very strong kid. 1469 FIDE. Perfect. Well, so there is also a statement by Scott. Scott suggests that in order to deal with the pass pawn, you should blockade it aside. No, I don't fully agree with you because, well, if you blockade it with a knight or the bishop, that's fine. But if there is a chance to attack this pawn with your rook from behind, that would be the best way to fight against the passed pawn. Okay, so what now? Bring the king to the center. You improve the other rook. You made the enemy rook passive. Now let's improve the king. King here, here, king f3, king d5, attacking there. Of course, they have to somehow take care about this pawn. In the game, they continued king e2 move. So who can tell me what's wrong with this? So king e3 looks logical, right? Because d4 is now protected. Yes, you're absolutely right. It's g5. How does it work? So now neither f4 nor h4 can be played, and black has just a simple idea to play f4 himself, chase the king away, and then at the right moment try to capture on d4. Why I'm saying at the right moment? Because in the game, when it was king e2 played, uh, taking on d4 fails. If you hear a capture on d4, they have a passed pawn. So rook takes, king takes. Well, actually, no, they can start with a4 here. They can start with a4, rook takes, king takes, and this king has to get distracted to this pawn. For example, let's say h4, f5, f3, then king goes to b4, and this king enters the enemy territory. So it still is a draw, because black has more pawns than white, but you have to calculate it. So king d4, king goes there, king e3, king takes g6, king takes f3, king takes f5. Then how do you draw the game here? Just king g3, h5, and king h4. So king g6, you just play this. Once they take, you take on h5. So because of the pass pawn game, the game may end in a draw. That's why you'd better avoid it. You'd better avoid capturing on d4 once your position is not prepared. That's why here black reacted with g5. Okay, so let me quickly answer the question of Dan. After king e7, cannot white play rook e3 check to prevent the king coming to d5? No, they cannot, because how do you defend this pawn? Again, you go back and then I play king e6, and this time if you deliver a check, I can still go to d5. So the rook has to stay on d3 to protect both pawns. That's the problem. So king e2, g5 anyway. Rook goes there. So what's the purpose of this move? Well, the purpose is that this pawn becomes poisoned again. So if you capture it with a rook, then rook d3 leads to exchange, and the game is drawing. Here you can say, well, I can just capture with the king because rook b4 makes the pawn too close to the king and easy target for black, so rook b4 doesn't work. But if you take with the king, what do you think? Which move white can play here? Rook d3? No, it's rook g3, of course, threatening to take on g4, 5, and play rook g4 as well. So rook b3, f6 to defend this. And then they have to play king e3 to defend there. So if rook takes, it's rook d3. King c4 instead. And now the rook has to move, after which the a3 pawn can be captured with a check. So that's why they play here. Now, again, your turn. So, well, you did everything that you could. You improved the position. You played g5, covering these two squares. You activate your rook in the very beginning. Your king is in the center and is preventing any enemy rook's maneuvering. So what else to play? When you do a strategic planning, you have to visualize one plan, then the second plan, then the third plan, and so on. Sometimes you can visualize only the first two and come up with a third plan later. Anyway, don't worry, even if you just visualize one strategic plan which improves your position, do it. Maybe it will be much easier for you to come up with the second plan once you reach this position and see it on the board. Yeah, so now you can use you can take advantage of Zogzwang. So d5. This fixes the pawn on d4 and eliminates a few squares the enemy king can potentially move to. So king d2, rook a8 first. Well, I'll show you why. King a2. Now black made a mistake and almost allowed white to draw the game. In this position, they played rook a7, just a waiting move, and then they played this. But actually, doing a5 and a4 does make sense here. What you should remember is that if you play a5, you can let him capture on g5. Don't forget about it, because your pawns may be too weak and the rook can capture them. So be accurate with f5. Maybe you should start with g6 first. Well, what do you think? What's the winning move for black here? Yes, it's well, this is a part of the plan, but now everything is protected on that side. So instead, rook b8. Rook b8 invading the enemy camp. How can they stop it? Well, this is just a blunder. So if this move is played, we can continue with a check. King goes there. We locate the rook behind, and the white moves are over. What they can do is just a pawn move. F3. Okay, f3, f5. Now, once they move the rook, they lose there. And maybe on d4 too. For example, rook d2, rook a3, king a2. Just rook a1 and let's attack the other side of the board. So instead of rook a2, just rook b3. Well, not sure. Well, actually, yes, rook b3 this time works because there is no easy way to enter the enemy camp. Well, there is a way, but then the d5 pawn becomes a passed pawn. So let me show you. Because their rook is hanging, they have to take. King takes. Now, king goes to attack our side like that. However, we have several plans. We can try g6 to stop invasion, or we can capture the pawn on d4, which I think is better. King f5, king f6. And in this position, let's try this move first, because I protect the pawn, and h4 now doesn't make sense. And king f6 is too slow. I just continue with this. So yes, rook b3 would work. Well, what else to play? Maybe rook d2. If so, then rook b3. Well, a4, just rook a4. a3, I mean, to capture this on the next move. Well, I don't know why black missed it. It was actually Akiba Rubinstein playing with black pieces, and he was a well-known positional player. Well, he played rook a7. Maybe of a time pressure, maybe because of some other reasons. And this is where he played rook e7. Well, at the very least, this move prevents the rook, the bishop, oh, sorry, the king coming to e2 and e3 back. That's why some other moves are required. And actually, it was possible to save the game here for white with a4. Rook a7 back, rook a3. Even after capturing this pawn on d4, say 5, rook a6, rook a4, the king goes back, and because of this passed pawn, the rook is tied down to this pawn and is passive, so that's why the king can do the rest. It can stop the d pawn, and it seems that on the queen side, on the king side, there is no chance for black to create a passed pawn. So rook c3, king d4. Rook a7 here, rook a3 was played, and rook a5. So this time the rook was stopped, the pawn was stopped on a4, and this makes difference. Because the king can now come closer and at the same time stay closer to the d5 pawn. So rook a1, king c4, they move the king, just d4 first. King goes back, and well, king b4 this time doesn't make much sense. Because this, and if you take on a4, the enemy king is closer to your pawns, and the game ends in a draw. That's why it was rook f5. So capturing this with a check. a5 doesn't work. It's too slow. For example, here, well, if this move, it's just this. If this move, it's the exchange of the rooks, and then king b5, stopping the pawn. So king e1 is a must, but then rook goes back. And after a6, it's possible to bring the rook to a8 in time. Or rook h2. Okay, good point. Rook f2, king e1 this, and rook h2. No, I think it won't work, because after this, how do you play? If you bring the rook to attack, then I have a6. And even after you take it, it's still a7, and you cannot stop it. So here, black loses. King d3, threatening checkmate. Okay, does make sense, but rook a3, and again, there is no checkmate, but I will continue with the promotion. So actually, rook h2 doesn't work. Rook h2, yeah, rook a4 is the move that at least saves the game. Fine, so king e1 was played in this position. King goes to b4, the pawn is stopped. It's blocked with the king to make the rook more active to be able to attack these pawns. So for example, if this, you can do this and capture this pawn. Rook a3 to stop it. Rook f4, defending. How to defend? Only with rook a3, but it fails because of king b4. So that's why he decided to sacrifice there, but to take the one on d4. After rook h4 is just completely winning. So if we exchange, then the king doesn't enter our, well, it does enter our territory, but the problem is that once he goes to g6, we can continue with, well, with f5, f4, and g3. If he goes that way, just king d3, he takes, we play this move. And every time he captures, there is a protected pass pawn on f6. Actually, we may not let him to capture and play king f5 here. So it's winning. Rook e2 was played instead, but, well, it's a losing position. The only thing that here white tried is rook c2 to stop, to cut the king off. What do you think? How to deal with this issue? f5, okay, f5, but how does f5 help you? Because the key idea is to bring the king to the place of action. Without a king, even having a few extra pawns, you may not win. Rook to a4. Well, guys, what you need is to bring the king, right? And you cannot bring the king through the line which is under the attack of the enemy rook. What you should do is block with your rook, exactly like John and, well, yeah, a lot of people suggested. Okay, so today we have even a representative of Chess Academy. Very good. Yeah, rook f5, rook c5, exactly. That was the best way. Black played king b7 first and decided to, well, he played this, well, having in mind this idea. But after the rook moves, there is no need to play like that, and then he just brought the king to the center. So finally, this move. How to deal with this move? Well, of course, black was expecting white to play king f5. How would you continue here? That's right. Thank you, guys. It's g6, passing the game to the pawn in game. Why? Because the pawn in game is completely winning. Well, it's a little similar to what happened in the last game between Gukesh and Ding Liren. Well, the king was here, but, well, it was losing anyway. So I even cannot imagine how it was possible for Ding to pass the game to that end game, which is very, well, which is so obvious. I think I have this game actually, so we can discuss it. Oh no, it's not. It's not this. It's the other game. Okay, fine. Oops. Let's continue. So king g6, g4, and king f4. So the game is over. Fine. So why this position is devoted to strategic thinking, to strategic planning, I mean? Well, because here, for example, it obvious what black can do in order to improve his position and try to play for a win. But you can at the very least visualize several different plans which doing one by one may improve your position and create potentially problems for white. Well, it's not winning if white plays properly, but activating your pieces, activation of your pieces forces your opponent to take the only decisions in order to save the game. And very often, even a strong grandmaster cannot take several proper decisions in a row and make a small inaccuracy or a mistake which you can take advantage of. So that was one plan. That was the second plan. And finally, invading the king to the enemy territory and pushing d5 with g5, of course, allowed black to progress and win one of the pawns. Fine, let's continue with the next example. Well, if you, for example, turn the engine on in this position, you will see zeros. Yes, the position can be equal, but it can be equal only in case if black plays properly. But it's white to move at the moment. And before thinking of which strategic plan we should initiate in this position, let's try to evaluate and define because of which factor white can play for a win in this position. So who can tell me which is because of which factor white has winning chances? White has a pawn majority on the king side, true, but black has a pawn majority on the queen side. You have to take it into account too. So thanks for your suggestion. The queen side cannot for okay. Good point from Scott that the queen side pawn majority cannot result in a passed pawn. So even if b5 is somehow played, it doesn't lead to a passed pawn because white can simply ignore it. And black won't have a chance to progress. After taking, there is no passed pawn. White has a passed pawn, and potentially they can drive the pawn to f6 and make a passed pawn. They have a knight in the center. Well, what they should do is try to improve. Yeah, there is a space for the king, so they should try to improve their king's position. And basically, you should start with king f4, but then bishop g6. In order to stop bishop g6, you should play this. Well, that was probably the best way to play. However, it's not obvious that this is a draw. So rook d7, well, if the rooks are exchanged, if not, then rook c3 is a little passive move. But if the rooks are exchanged, actually this endgame, which seems like the endgame with extra pawn, which should be completely winning for white, is drawing. How is it drawing? It is drawing because there is no way to progress after e5. So for example, g6, they can take, or they can play this move, king e7, and in order to progress, you have to sacrifice the pawn. But if you sacrifice the pawn, you don't have any chances. So let me show you. So this, king d6, king f4, king e6, and this is a draw anyway. So this pawn blocks the way for the king to enter. If, for example, we could exchange these pawns, if we somehow remove it from the board, then I would say white is winning. Black didn't play. They started with rook d7, thinking that exchanging the rooks will help. Rook c3. So yes, this position is a bit unpleasant, but at the very least, the knight can move. Rook d1, king f4, attacking this bishop. Now, still capturing this was a good idea. The knight in the center is very dangerous. Instead, well, black thought, we have a bishop. That's why let's keep the bishop on the board, because we play on both sides of the board. And the bishop is usually stronger than the knight in open positions because of his long reach. This time, no, the knight in the center is better because it covers the king from checks from behind, and it controls f6, so it defends there. So just king f5 and the f pawn move allows white to get a winning position. So bishop d7. Now, what do you think? Let's play king e5 or not? Okay, while you are thinking, we will rewind a little and follow the Scott's suggestion to white should have traded rooks. Why? Ah, you mean now bishop e4 doesn't work, but I can just play king e6. How do you progress? Because if you move the knight, there is even a chance to lose the game. No, it doesn't work actually. So you have to avoid a trade if you're playing for a win and then try to invade the enemy camp with your king. So bishop d7 and king e5 or not? Well, if you do king e5, then it can be this. And you have to defend this pawn. You can defend it with a knight move, but the problem is that they deliver a check from behind and you have to retreat back. That's why instead you first play rook e3, because the rook is not doing anything on c3, but on e3 it will cover the king from checks from behind. Rook h1, knight g3 to defend in advance. Rook h4 check, king goes to e5 as we were originally planning. They played this move. However, it doesn't help because after f4 the knight is protected and the f pawn is closer to the f6 move. Well, what did white reach? They were able to occupy e5 with the king, shouldering the enemy king and getting the control over the f6 square. So now just this plan will allow them to win. After king takes, the king can go to g7, capture this pawn, or maybe with the support of the king, just g6, g7, g8 will work. So king d8, f5, rook h4, doesn't matter, f6, take, king takes. Well, taking with the pawn I think was fine too, but taking with the king is more transparent for white. What now? Bishop e8. They are threatening this pawn. Here, if you play h6, you make a strategic mistake because now the bishop and the pawn are able to cover to stop your pawns, to blockade them. So maybe g6. What do you think? Well, g6, take, rook h6. However, I think it still should work. Okay, so maybe I played the wrong move. Let me play this. Then you can play g7. Okay, fine. So rook here, rook e8, king takes, then you play knight f5, then what? Well, white is winning. White is winning here, I agree. So it seems that g6 still worked. But instead, white played even the better move, knight f5, and now the pawn becomes poisoned. For example, if rook h5, it's a fork on g7. Well, and bishop h5 is not playable because the rook is hanging. They played rook f4, and now g6. So white g6 is now better because there is no rook h6 move. Rook g4, and well, what would you play here? So one move, after which I think black should resign. White didn't play the best move, but that move was still a winning move. Okay, rook g3. Probably the simplest way to play is rook g3. I agree, because this king is too far to block this pawn, and it seems that the bishop has to be sacrificed. g7 seems to be a little risky, I think, because of rook g6, and the king has to retreat, and then bishop f7. Maybe it's still winning because you have this plan, and then play g8, because the bishop cannot move along this diagonal. All the squares, well, e6 only. So g7 looks suspicious. Probably still works. Oh, well, actually, if I were playing, I would start with rook d3 check in order to force the king to move away to c8, for example, or maybe to c7, doesn't matter. And then I would play rook g3 because the king is further, and I don't even need to calculate anything. I'm completely winning. What did white play? White just took. King takes, and now he plays g7. So he is threatening with knight h6 and g8. King d7. Well, knight h6 worked. Instead, he played knight h4 move, trying to block with knight g6 and then promote. So, for example, if rook f4, then I think he has to go back and still do knight h6, because now he has king g6 and then the pawn is promoted. So rook g7, and it seems that this king is closer to the queen side, but no. King e6, yes, he does shoulder, but after knight f3, we cover these two important squares, and because of that, the king has to move through f5. Now, let's just directly come to the queen side and capture that. King b5. So both pawns are protected. The rest we need to do is just to bring the knight and capture these three and promote them. So what did white do? So white visualized that they need to try to bring the king to e5. Especially after black made the rook move and let us occupy e5. However, in order to do this, first we have to play h5 to cover the g6 square. Otherwise, the bishop would prevent us from playing h5. Then the king got there, and then the plan is just to get the pawn to f6. And this provides white with a winning position. All you need to take care of is just this attack with the rook on d1, e1, and so on. But by doing such prophylaxis like rook a3 and knight g3, everything is safe. Fine. So, by the way, guys, who does see this position not for the first time? It's a famous game between Jezero Capablanca and Savieli Tartakova. Okay, so Alex, you mean you have already seen it before? This is a very classical one, and it's also covered in my courses once or even twice. So who else remembers? Okay, so if just a few people know this position, the others who are not familiar with it, can you please tell me what white should be doing? Which strategic plans white should initiate? And while you're thinking, let me tell you about some specifics. Once you are once you are trying to find a strategic plan. So what you have to pay attention to. So the main role is devoted to the pawn structures and the exchanges of the pawn structure, as well as the king's activity and the passed pawn. When you think strategically, very unlikely that you're going to focus on the attack of the enemy king. First of all, because of a few pieces left on the board in the end game, and second, because strategic usually means very long plans, which will allow your opponent to prepare for that, and they will definitely find a way of how to secure the king if you want to initiate a strategic attack, for example. So strategic planning is I mean, may contain a lot of approaches and a lot of methods to play in the end game. However, the main goal of it is to improve your pieces or make the enemy position worse. Sometimes, once you, let's say, come up with a strategic plan and you see that this plan no longer works because something transformed. For example, the exchange of pieces happened and you don't see it. Then you have to correct your original plan and think about something else. Do not rush. So take your time, but come up with a plan. Okay, so yes, it's bishop takes f5. Definitely. Then, for example, then suggests to, well, first of all, they don't have intermediate move because king goes there, and after this, the king already invades the enemy camp and captures the pawn on f5. That's why g takes f5 is a must. So then suggested this move, but the problem is that rook c3 cuts the king off. That's why instead of doing rook d7, which could be done later because it's hard to protect this pawn, let's improve the king. So here, actually, because this king is cut off, we may activate our king and create some kind of attack on the enemy king. But it's not the attack of the king itself. It's just we're just taking advantage of the enemy king's passivity, trying to capture the pawns and at the same time force the enemy rook to defend the back rank. So how does it go? King g3. What else they can do if not capture the pawn? Well, I don't know actually. It seems that capturing the pawn is the best. But even this move fails. Black is a pawn up, but the piece's activity decides the game. Rook f3 was played. Well, what if they played something else? For example, rook c1, threatening with this. It's still losing, g6, because this move fails. They can exchange the rooks and capture the pawn, but here we are able to promote the f pawn. For example, how to continue? f5 or yeah, f5. Well, how do they play? If they play c6, then we do f5, and they cannot stop us from promotion. For example, king g8, king e7, and even c5 doesn't help because f6 and then f7, f8 are played with a check. If they try to do c5, then king d5 works. Not this because of this, but king d5. So now what? They capture, we capture, they come closer, and we leave the pawn where it is, but enter the enemy queen side and capture their pawns there, and shoulder the enemy king. Instead of king g3, was it possible to play g6? Yes, it was, but no, it was not possible because then the king is cut off and doesn't participate in the attack. So the enemy king is able to block the pawn and liquidate any mating threats. So rook c3, king h4, rook f3, g6. Take there, king goes to g5, rook goes to e4. Now take or not to take. What do you think? Okay, not to take. Why not to take? It's just a free pawn. Maybe it's better to take. So king f6 threatening with a checkmate, but king f6 does threaten with a checkmate. However, they can just move the rook. Oh no, they cannot move the rook. They have to move king to g8 to avoid checkmate. So you shouldn't capture this pawn not because threatening the mate is better, but because this pawn works as a shield for the white king. So king f6, if king f5, then in order to defend against checkmate here, he can just check from behind. But if we play this move, threatening with this, so king e8 loses because we promote. They have to play this move, and then we play this, king goes here, rook c7. They have to bring the rook back. And now we can take on f5 and there are no checks from behind. So the pawn is lost anyway, but we are able to improve our position first. So king f5, rook goes to e4, king f6. Still threatening with a checkmate. But now they deliver a check from behind. Good news is that we already captured the pawn on c7 and force the king to move to the edge. So the king in the corner is too far from the place of action. And if we pass the game to the pawn in game, we are closer to the enemy queen side. So king e5, rook g4. Okay, the pawn is hanging. So what should we do? Come closer or what? Yeah, g7 works because passing the game to the pawn in game, well, they have to move this because if they take, passing the game to the pawn in game is completely losing. And the king cannot stop it. So here we can promote or we can play or we can shoulder. Well, we don't really need it. If you just calculate, you see that after a6, king c8 and a7, they cannot reach the corner. b8 is under our control already. So after g7, they cannot exchange. They have to play this. And we can simply capture the other pawns left. And it's winning. So a few more moves was played here, after which Black resigned. Well, look at this position again. So this pawn is hanging, and there is nothing we can do to save it. We can capture on f5 because this knight occupies a very important outpost, and we should somehow deal with it. And it also allows us to get a passed pawn. So after this and this, we have to visualize this plan once the king invades the enemy territory. And because there is a rook on the 7th rank, the enemy king cannot stop us from doing it. And the rook cannot stop too, because, well, the rook can retreat back to c6, but the f5 pawn will be lost anyway. And then we are able to advance 2 passed pawns. Fine. Let's continue. So before we continue, I would like to remind you that if you want to support my webinars, you can do it by making a donation. So using this link, it works easy. So just use this link, then click donate, and pop-up window appears. You enter the amount you want to donate. It can be any amount. So for example, let's say $10. Then you click PayPal button and it redirects you to your PayPal account. And then you can send this amount to my PayPal account. So it helps me to prepare better for the webinars. However, this is only if you have such an opportunity. All webinars are always free. What else I would like to share with you? So we are doing this master chess tactics and strategy, and some people who participate, who already enrolled in this course, these are group lessons actually. We have two classes, and I'm sure that the vast majority of participants are excited about these group classes. What did we cover? Already two classes. So 1 week, the first week was past. Well, I was explaining how to the concept of forcing moves, intermediate moves. We were talking about how to play with opposite side castling positions, how to make decision making, how to make decisions properly. What else? How to solve puzzles, and of course the homework was provided. So next week, starting from tomorrow, we will talk about dynamic attacks. The link, so this is the link. If you want to participate, actually, let me copy this link for you. Yeah, thanks, Dan. I'm glad that you enjoyed our first week's classes. Yes, if you have any issues with the homework, please let me know. And now this. So those of you who want to join, you're welcome. 22 live sessions left, but if you join, I can send you the recording of the previous two classes, as well as the homework. Okay, let's continue with our main topic, which is strategic planning in the endgame. This position, taken from the game between Siegbert Tarash against Richard, or some people say Richard Reti. Why to move? The material is equal. We can definitely notice that this rook and bishop are more active than knight and rook. But it seems like this is the only advantage we have. The king is cut off, while our king is not. What do you think white should be doing here? Follow the yellow brick road, okay. F3, rook g7 first. Okay. Don't let the knight get active. This is what Dan meant. Okay, exactly. So you shouldn't let the knight become active. Once the knight goes to e4, you have some problems. So the knight on e4 probably is better than a bishop on h6. Okay, so first of all, it was rook g7. King f8 is not possible. That's why king h8 has to be played. And now he plays this, not anything else. For example, like let's say king h2, trying to activate the king would be a critical mistake. I would even say blunder. What do you think black would continue in such a case? Then there is a better move than knight e4. So knight e4 is definitely possible. Knight g8. Yes, thank you, Alex. It's knight g8. Why knight g8? Because if the bishop moves, the rook is hanging. If anything else, then they just take the bishop. So probably you have to sacrifice exchange, and then I don't think you can hold the position. Maybe you can do a kind of a fortress, but I'm not sure. So that's why the rook has to move again. Now, doing knight e4 well, works, but then rook e6. And if they take on c3, well, this pawn is a weakness. You can probably still continue with f3. And I actually think that that was the best way to play for black. Knight b5, rook e7, the pawn is poisoned. However, this is not what black chose. This is not what black chose. They played king g8 first, and this move allows us to play f3. So activating the rook and letting us playing f3 was the first part of the plan. Now, what they can do. So, for example, they cannot play a rook move in order to defend the pawn. Well, just this, king goes there, and then rook f7. The knight is hanging, and rook f8 becomes a threat. So the knight has to go there. But if the knight goes there, it's always bishop g7 mate. Well, e5, but then d takes e5. The knight has to move again, and then it's either rook f8 mate or again bishop g7. That's why bringing the rook, moving the rook away from the eighth rank is a disaster for black. And what they have to do is just to remaneuver the knight, because any other move is a blunder. Knight e8. Your turn. How to progress? Of course, you can capture the pawn on e6, but is it enough? So if you capture the pawn on e6, they probably activate their king and get some practical chances to take this pawn and to draw the game. So what I want you to do is to come up with a strategic plan, a certain series of moves which improves your position or maybe creates more danger for the enemy position or the enemy king's position even. Okay, so good point. Could they play rook e8 in this position? No, I don't think so. Rook g7, king h8, and then rook f7. Where does the knight go? So it looks like e8 was the only square for the knight. Well, it can go to h5. Well, obviously, you see that these squares are unavailable, and knight g8 means bishop g7 mate. So this move, but if this move, you can play g4, right? So let's say take, knight g3, and it's still trapped like that. So rook e8 doesn't work. But we should discuss it, I agree. So coming with the king, exactly, coming with the king using the dark squares. Knight e8 and king h2. So here, 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 or here, and then somehow you should try to reach f6. Another check, forcing the king to stay on h8. So the rook goes back and gains a temper. Knight b5 and king g3. So they gain a pawn. Black is even one pawn up, but it doesn't help them because the king invades f6. After the king goes to f6, there is a checkmate. So what you should do is something like that. This is a checkmate that white visualized starting this king maneuver. Well, even if there was no checkmate, the king in the enemy camp may allow white to capture the pawns in the enemy camp and keep the rook tied down to the back rank always. So maybe just improving the bishop with the king on f7 would help, would provoke such something like that, and these pawns g6 and d6 would be lost. Knight b5 was played, king e5, rook e8, king goes to f6, king g8. So your turn, how would you play? Now you cannot go to f7, so you have to attack the king, but if you attack the king, then what? You cannot play king f7 after that because you trap the rook here. For example, they can continue with knight d6 even. So g3. Well, g3, what's the purpose? Okay, rook g7, king. Well, if king f8, it's obvious. You win a piece at the very least. But if they go there, king f7 is not playable. First of all, you're not threatening with anything. Second, they have knight d6. But they can just play this move. And how do you progress? You can capture on e6, but they capture on d4. So I don't think it's winning. Rook g7, king h8, and rook b7 with the tempo. Absolutely right. There is no way to chase the king away with rook f8 or even with a knight check, because the only squares the knight can check are these two. So e8 can be potentially reached, but first they have to move the rook away. Knight d6, rook d7. Knight goes back. And now king f7 works, and there is no way to avoid a checkmate. So in the game, it was played rook g8. What do you think? How white should continue here? Yes, it's definitely rook d8. So if rook takes, bishop g7 mate. If knight d6, they just lose a knight. So rook d8 and bishop g7. Well, you remember I was telling you that the attack on the king is unlikely to be a strategic plan. Here, the strategic plan was to invade the enemy camp with the king, which not only creates a mating threat, but attacks enemy pawns and ties enemy pieces down to the defense of the king. So, of course, they could avoid a checkmate by means of sacrifices, but no, it would be still losing. So how to come up with this plan? Well, I think it's on the surface because these pieces are really good. No pawn maneuver can be played. Maybe g4, but what does g4 do? When you see the king is not doing anything, it does make sense to think of what you can do with this king. Maybe you can come up with this idea, and once your king reaches a3, you see that, well, it's better to move it to e5. And once the king reaches e5, you see there is a checkmating idea, or at the very least, you take the pawn on e6. So this is how it works, even if you cannot visualize the strategic plan. Just think of what you can do in the position, what you can do that may improve your position or make the enemy position more tough. Okay, and finally, the last example that we have is taken from the game between Bobby Fischer. So here you may say, well, Victor, it's not the end game. We are talking about end games, but it's not. Right, it's not the end game. It's end of the middle game, I would say. But here, despite having the queens on the board, you may still take advantage of using the endgame principles. So, why to move? I want you to visualize two strategic plans. Okay, queen g6 can be a candidate move. So you have extra exchange. Well, what black can do? There is not much that black can do. Well, the only problem is their pawn march in the center that you have to be prepared. Well, queen g6 invades the enemy camp. I don't think they can stop both queen f7 and queen to e8. Queen h5, some flexibility with queen h5 move, but I don't think there is a big difference. Queen d1, queen d1, d4. So you provoke weakening, you provoke d4, and then the complex of the light squares is weakened, and you can potentially play queen f3, but from f3 you cannot invade. Good point, but there is no way to invade the enemy camp. So doing queen g6 or queen h5 with queen f7 or queen e8 ideas works. So d4. Now queen e8. Well, queen f7 was playable too, but if so, then just maybe queen e7 works. This time queen f7, no, I don't think it works. So even if queen f7 was played, check, queen e7 doesn't look good. At least you can play this move, threaten a5. So what do they have to do? This? Well, then you can do a check, and you did the first part of the plan. You invaded the enemy camp. But in the game, it was played queen e8. King b7. Now, what's the second part of the plan? Well, no way to play c3. This probably weakens the king too much. Um, so if you could somehow use your rook and invade the enemy territory, it would work. Trade the queens. Trade the queens. So let's discuss it. So queen b5, for example, is a queen's trade. Maybe there is a better way to trade the queens. Well, this is how you lose a pawn. And after they play bishop c5, e4 is a problem. Also a4. So it may be not a winning position because there are no open files to invade the enemy camp with your rook, and you are unlikely to create them. At the very least, he can create a fortress, for example, locate his bishop on b6 and the king on d5, so something like that. How to progress? So come with the king, right? So come with the king is the plan. So despite that the queens are on the board, invading the enemy camp with the king works because the king then will attack the g7 pawn. And then once you exchange the queens, then the king will capture the bishop or the pawn on g7. The position will become completely winning. So what did happen? So king h3, queen c6. So he offers an exchange of the queens. Well, this is a blunder because of a perpetual check. This, and the king has to retreat back because if the king goes to h5, it's just a checkmate. So the king would have to retreat. Queen h1 and the repetition. So the bishop is poisoned. Exchanging the queens may not allow white to win. For example, take, king g4. So the king comes there. No, king d5, and after king h5, the black king invades the enemy camp first, and here you may experience serious issues. So queen c6, how to play? Queen f7. Let's keep the queens on the board, but avoid the perpetual check. So king b6. Oh, this time they cannot block. They will still offer a queen exchange with such a move, but this time you can capture because there is no way for the black queen to invade your camp. Okay, so let's say this, rook h2. But I think it's even worse. So, for example, it can be this. Well, rook g2 is just a repetition. You have to go there, but then it's h5. And after this move, it's still a checkmate. So probably rook g2, then there, then king g4. King g4, queen g. No, I can just repeat the position with this move instead. Yeah, at the very least, it's a draw. Maybe queen g2 is a better move, but with this, it's a draw. So, and the repetition once again. So rook h2 doesn't help. This, king b6, rook g2 to stop rook h1. So to be able to still continue the plan, but you cannot do it right now. The rook is hanging, right? So you have to do some preparation. Queen c5 was played because the bishop became hanging, and moving the bishop means losing the pawn. So that's why they played this. And because there is no attack anymore, we can make a king move. However, first, white wants to prepare their position. They play this to avoid e4. Queen d6, queen e8. So maybe this is not required, but queen b5 now becomes a threat. Queen b5, queen a5. So if only white wins this pawn, it's a completely winning endgame because the pawn can be advanced and the a file becomes more open. So queen e8 forces queen c5. So black pieces are tied down to the defense and cannot prevent the white king's maneuvering. Bishop e7, king h5, bishop d6, king g6. If they go back to f8 to defend this, it's king f7, and the bishop is hanging. And once the bishop moves, it's king g7 anyway. That's why bishop c7 was played, which allowed white to capture on g7. Well, with such a move, black tried to defend from checks like that, and now they try to activate their queen to try to capture on g3. Also, bishop c7 defends a5, so now queen b5 doesn't lose a pawn. What would you continue here? Well, yeah. So I think it makes sense to keep the g3 pawn alive. So queen d3. This time the exchange of the queens is completely losing. Well, you may think that queen d3 leaves the king vulnerable, but it's not a big issue. Queen c6. So he wants to go to e8 and so on, but it's impossible. So after king h6, queen e8, and it's already a blunder. If they tried something else like queen d7, then with queen c4, you prevent these moves. And then you can play king g6, queen f7, and capture on f6 even with your queen, or just try to advance the pawn because your queen is successfully covering everything. And if queen e8, after king goes to g6, it's queen f7 again. So that's why queen e8 was played, but this is a blunder. So what's wrong with this move? Yes, it's queen d4. So if pawn takes, rook takes queen, it's game over. That's why bishop b6. But if we want to stop this activity, let's just play queen d5. Now, black already resigned. Well, they could try this, but after king g6, they have no checks. And this is coming. Or just h5 is coming. So how to continue? Queen e8, queen f7, a cross check, after which the queens are exchanged and it's a winning endgame. Okay, perfect. So, well, even in the late middle game, you can still use strategic planning and come up with these ideas. So, like activating the king and invading the enemy camp with your king. So let's sum it up. I actually have some homework for you that I'm going to share. So I will send it in the chat, and tomorrow I will also send it by email for those of you who register it. This PDF, and in this PDF we are going to discuss these two positions. Black to move in both cases. So, for example, in the second one, there is an unpleasant pin of the bishop. Your task is to decide how to deal with it. And here on the first one, the bishop is hanging, so you should decide how to deal. Maybe you move the rook back to e7 and defend. Maybe you'll find something else. Okay. So let's make a summary. What I want you to learn from this webinar: when you pass the game to the end game and you don't know what you should be doing, think about different things, different plans. First of all, attacking the enemy pawn weaknesses in order to either win them or try to force enemy pieces to stay defensively instead of creating problems for your position. Then think of what you should do with the king, because the king in the end game, once you believe your king doesn't become a target of the attack, you should think of how to participate in this game with your king, and the value, I mean, the power of the king is equal to the rook, because the king can attack or defend all squares around him. So if the king in the center would work perfectly well, the king on the edge of the board would become useless and maybe the object of the attack. So try to visualize what you can do in the position and whether these actions improve your position or not. For example, you remember we were talking about this one, and from here it's not obvious that king f4, king f5 is a winning plan, but having in mind that you have a pawn majority on the king side and potentially you can create a pass pawn allows you to come up with this winning plan. So, well, strategic thinking is important in many endgames, not all of them, but you definitely have to consider different plans, try to visualize them, and also try to visualize what you have to do next. Okay, so we are done for today. Any questions, guys? Maybe you have questions regarding my group classes, Master Chess Tactics and Strategy. There will be a webinar next Sunday, same time, so everyone is welcome. I will announce it during the week, most likely on Wednesday. Okay, I'm glad that you enjoyed. So, well, what else you can do is to share these webinars with your friends, chess players, so they can come next weekend and enjoy the class too. Okay, perfect. If no questions, then we are done for today. Thank you for coming and hope to see everyone next Sunday.